I'm Lucy from Bookaxe, and I'm here today to review my first 3 books from the Man Booker Prize longlist. Anyone who saw our August book chat will know that for better or for worse, Scott and I have committed to reading the whole Man Booker longlist on our channel. It's a bit of a cheat really though compared to some other channels because we're divvying it up between us. We have got obviously 2 sets of eyes, 2 heads, 2 reading people. So we divvied the list up pretty much 50-50. Helpfully though, because it was an odd number of books, I had already actually read Warlight, and I will link the review down there, bing, up in that corner as well. And if you would like to see the rest of our reviews as they come, please do also subscribe to our channel. But 3 reviews today to start you off. Now, the first of which is From a Low and Quiet Sea by Donal Ryan. The second is Snap by Belinda Bauer, and the third is Sabrina, the graphic novel by Nick Drnaso. Now, the first of these books that I read was From a Low and Quiet Sea, and gotta be honest, picked it up, chose it first because it was a tiddler, and I thought I would ease myself in rather gently. But actually, it was pretty good. I really rather enjoyed it. It is set from 3 different perspectives, which is spread across 4 different sections. Now, the first 3 sections are the different 3 people, and they're sort of in discrete chunks. So the first is a Syrian refugee called Farouk, who is a doctor fleeing his country in the height of war with his wife and child, and it follows his journey out of Syria, basically. The second is a young man in Ireland called Lampy, who works in a care home, but is pretty dissatisfied really with everything he's doing in life, and he's pining for the girl that dumped him really brutally, who he loved very much. The third section is an elderly man called John, who is also Irish, looking back on his life and all the things really that he did wrong and he regrets, because he led a sort of very violent and brutal and quite borderline criminal life, I guess really, which was all triggered by a childhood trauma. Now, the theme that runs through all 3 of these books, or all 3 of these people, is how they deal with loss and grief and regret, basically. So how they look back on the mistakes that they've made and the losses that it's caused them and what they wish they could do about them. And I've actually seen this book pretty roundly butchered on BookTube, actually. When I finished reading it and then I went to look at sort of what other people had thought of it, generally people weren't especially keen, with the exception, I think, of Eric Carl Anderson. Now, their main criticism was that these 3 characters sort of existed almost as short stories. For the vast majority of this novel, they exist in a vacuum. You are looking at 3 discrete people existing separately, and it is not clear how they're going to cross. Everyone pretty much said that the writing is beautiful, and it truly is. It is really restrained but lyrical in the way that it's constructed at the same time. Ryan has sort of, in my opinion, done a brilliant job of cramming a whole load of emotion into a short book in a really beautiful way, and that definitely sustained me through all these discrete sections. And for me, therefore, it didn't really matter that they didn't tie up until right at the end of the book. Maybe the last 20 pages, I think, that actually these characters' paths cross. And I guess you could say that there's a pretty obvious way for the paths of a doctor, an elderly man, and a young man who works in a care home, for their paths to actually cross. But when it did finally come, it was sort of triumphantly unexpected to me, actually. And it's a very delicate and discreet way in which they do cross. And I thought the ending was utterly perfect. And it didn't bother me that the three strands met so incredibly late in the book, like it seems to bother an awful lot of people, because the book was short. I think had it been drawn out longer, it probably would have been a problem for me, but in a novel of this length, it's absolutely fine. The one criticism that I do have of it, however, is to do with Farouk, so the Syrian refugee. When I first read his section, I was really drawn to it. It's about the sort of subjects that I would typically pick up. I like a bit of politics in books and things like that, so it's sort of comfort zone to me. But when I had finished it and I sat in it and I thought about it and I looked at it in comparison with the other sections, the two later characters to me felt really distinctly, uniquely Irish. They were rooted really tightly in a time and a place, and they felt rounded and believable to me. Whereas Farouk was thinner. And for me, what I mean when I say this is that he wasn't sort of distinctly Syrian. He was almost kind of a cardboard cutout of what we in sort of a Western society sort of imagines the migrant journey to be. It was sort of a generic migrant journey, and it didn't have sort of, to me, that real richness that the other two strands had. So although I did enjoy it, and I did think that it had done well enough, I wanted it to just be that little bit more insightful and rooted to a specific time and place. You know, he could have been Libyan or Afghani or Iraqi. I wanted him to be Syrian and his story to sort of, you know, transcend the generic migrant narrative, I guess, which I didn't quite get. But overall, there is an awful lot to love in this book. And I also have to give an honourable mention to Lampy's grandpa. So Lampy is the middle character. He's the young man who works in the care home. And his grandfather, for me, absolutely elevated the entire middle section of this book, and probably was my favourite thing about the whole book, actually, because he is so brash and bawdy and brutal on the surface, but he just has this warm heart and this fierce loyalty underneath, which was just absolutely wonderful. So that was From a Low and Quiet Sea by Donal Ryan, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it on the shortlist. I'm going to put that out there now. I've only read I've only read 3 of them, so I might say that about all of them. I'm not going to say that about all of them, but I could end up with more than 6. I don't know where I'm going on this one. First read, I was like, yeah, this is a Booker book. Which leads me into my review of the second book, which was Snap by Belinda Bauer. I was so excited to see this book on the Booker longlist because it is proper genre crime. By all accounts, this is sort of not really a conventional Booker type book, and I was super excited to see it there purely because I thought, do you know what, they're looking beyond sort of what is sometimes perceived as sort of bookish snobbery to recognise that books outside, you know, hardcore literary fiction can have fabulous, fabulous merit. I'll come back to that, of whether I thought, whether my opinion changed, I guess, having read it. But in a nutshell, this book, which I've just seen, is completely covered in my fingerprints. Very sorry about that. Sticky cover. Is set in Britain, in a part of Britain actually that I know very well, and I was super excited when I opened it and saw where it was. I was like, West Country, fabulous. But it is set between 1998 and 2001, I think, pretty much, roughly. And when we open, it is so gripping. There are 3 children in a car on the side of the motorway, on the hard shoulder, broken down. A young boy, I think he's about 9 or 10, or no, maybe a little older actually. He's about 12. It's relevant. It's not a overly detailed detail. He's in the car with his sister, who is slightly younger than him, and his very, very much younger than him sister, who's just a toddler, I think. And their mother has gone to try and find a telephone because their car has broken down. And it's a sweltering hot day and it's getting hotter and hotter, and she's been gone longer and longer. And eventually these children decide that they are going to go and see if they can find her. And they walk down the hard shoulder, and it really tugs at your heartstrings because, you know, the boy whose perspective that it's from just keeps going, nobody's stopping for us, nobody's helping, nobody cares. And they find the emergency telephone, and it is off the hook and it is swinging from its wire, and their mother is nowhere to be found. She turns up brutally murdered 9 days later. And obviously the children's world comes crashing down. We then jump forward a few years, 3 years maybe, I think, and the young man, whose name I can't remember right now, does it say it on the back? No, it doesn't bother. The young man is supporting his two siblings, having turned to a life of crime. His father one day went out for milk and never came back. He had a little bit of a breakdown, and somehow they are dipping under the radar of social services and surviving in this house in the most horrendous conditions. And he is robbing, thieving, burglarizing to keep them ever so slightly just above drowning point. Then we meet another character who is a heavily pregnant woman. Oh, the murdered mother, also heavily pregnant. It matters. Then we meet another pregnant woman whose house has just been broken into, and she finds a knife on the bed. She was in the house at the time. She's absolutely terrified, and a message that says, "I could have killed you." Now, bizarrely, she then does not call the police. And this is the first of just a few plot holes that unfortunately make this book just fall ever so slightly short as a crime novel. There's one other perspective actually that I'll just quickly mention, which is that of the hard-boiled divorced detective. Yep, we've met him before, haven't we? Marvel, his name is. And actually I really quite liked him, even though he was a total cliche of a detective. And he is charged with solving the burglary sort of epidemic, but also ultimately is thrown into the sort of historic murder investigation for the young boy's mother. Now, that was a really long and rambly description of this book, wasn't it? But actually, overall, I really enjoyed it. So that's the first thing to say, actually, about this book. It is a good read. It is an entertaining read. I was definitely turning the pages. At the very beginning, I was definitely pretty unnerved and creeped out, and definitely went to check whether the back door was locked after I'd read the burglary bit. And although I probably wasn't scared for the rest of the novel like I was in the beginning, I was definitely entertained. And it did twist and turn in ways that were unexpected to me. Other than sort of cliched hard-boiled detective, the other characters weren't cliches to me. They were pretty original. I felt for the young boy whose mother had been murdered, and he turned to crime, and his relationships with his sisters was just lovely. And he's a really interesting character that you can root for. And also he has a accomplice, buddy, criminal friend called Smooth Louie, who is just one of the best characters I can remember reading recently. He's called Smooth Louie on account of the fact that he shaves all of his body hair and is obsessed by plucking out even the tiniest hint of a whisker. And also he has a small son called Baz, who he keeps on an extendable dog lead and just gives him a yank when he's about to wander into the lake. So I really, really liked him. Belinda Bauer, can we have a whole Smooth Louie book? That would be great. But this book wasn't magnificent because of the plot holes. One, I just could not believe that this woman would not have called the police after what first happened, and then all the other things that happened afterwards. I was like, come on, you would obviously call the police. And the other thing is there's some plot holes around the murder weapon, which I can't really go into without giving any spoilers away, but there were just so many unasked questions that you just thought, really? And also the detective was a bit slow on the uptake around several things. I just thought, come on, you should have seen that coming, because I was asking why. But yeah, overall an entertaining read. However, going to go right back to the beginning of me chatting about this book and say, book. I am not sure why this book was here. The whole way through when I was reading it, I was waiting for it to knock my socks off somehow, for it to transcend the genre in some way, to go, this is why crime is absolutely fabulous, and this is why we should be here. The writing is fabulous. There's something that just elevated it above your ordinary but very good crime genre book to justify its place on the Booker. And I just didn't get that. And I was so disappointed, because kind of what I feel is that, you know, this is just a publicity stunt now, isn't it? I will eat my hat if that book makes it onto the shortlist, because although it is good, it was clearly picked to get everyone talking about, oh, there's crime on the Booker, which sucker fell for. But then it just doesn't deliver. And now they've got all that publicity, I just feel that they're probably rightly going to go back sort of a bit more to their literary roots, and yeah, do the shortlist differently. I can't see that book making it onto the cut, and I don't think it should either. I'm really sorry, Belinda Bauer, because I really enjoyed it. But yeah, does that make sense? Does what I'm talking about make sense? It makes sense in my head. Good crime read. Why is it on the Booker? There you go. Which, actually, I'm managing to do some quite seamless links here, okay? Why is it on the Booker? Let's talk about Sabrina by Nick Drnaso. It's not co. What is it? Drnaso. Oh no, sorry. I really should get better at this. But Nick has written a graphic novel called Sabrina, which has been talked about so much, hasn't it? Goodness me. First, I'll tell you a little bit about what it's about and what I thought, and then I'll probably have a bit of ramble. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So, Sabrina. This is her here. I thought she was a man when I met her on the first page. The artwork is pretty bleak. But that makes it sound like I'm being really negative. Okay, that was a bad place to start. I'll tell you what it's about. This is Sabrina. We meet her and she is at her parents' house cat sitting while they're on holiday. So instantly, actually, I quite liked her because, you know, cat person. But then very quickly, after she's done a crossword with her sister, we learn that she has disappeared. And we are thrown to the next character, who is Teddy, her boyfriend, who in the aftermath of her disappearance has gone to stay with his old high school buddy, who is now in the Air Force. I think he's got sort of like a desk job in the Air Force. And even though they were out of touch for a very, very long time, he's turned to him in his hour of need and they are living together. Now, Calvin, I think it was Calvin, the Air Force chap, has just been left by his wife. And they've taken his small daughter far, far away to Florida. And so they're kind of both in this house, pretty miserable and alone. When what happens is that a really hideous tape of Sabrina's murder, up until now she had just disappeared, a tape of her murder is sent to news outlets across America and they are catapulted into the limelight. The story is then really not about what happened to Sabrina, but more about what people want to have happened to her, what they think might possibly have happened to her, and in turn sort of is just this really thoughtful investigation, I guess, of how in the internet age we are not satisfied with surface level information, how we are always looking for more and more detail, particularly around sort of horrific news events. We are using them almost as entertainment and searching out to find really unnecessary levels of detail about these murders, but also sort of interaction with it. We're trying to make them become our own stories. So conspiracy theories play a big part in this. And what happens is that Teddy, the boyfriend, sort of gets obsessed by listening to this radio show about all sorts of conspiracy theories in sort of the midst of his misery. But then his own life sort of starts to become one as well. And Calvin gets drawn in as people sort of start saying, well, you know, Sabrina wasn't real and these people are actors. And what it does is look in fabulous, original depth and detail at how the internet is feeding our voyeurism, I guess, really. And it's really unsettling, I think, in a way, because the way it's presented as a graphic novel, sort of with snippets of internet pages and things like that, you know, makes you feel a little bit culpable too, because who of us hasn't, you know, occasionally clicked on that totally clickbait headline just to, you know, see what it's all about and things like that. You know, this goes to the extreme, but you can see your own behaviour in there a little bit, and it is definitely unsettling. Whether it was an enjoyable read, I'm not entirely sure it was for me. I was sort of curious about it in an intellectual way about what he was doing and where he was going to take it and how he was going to do it, but I wasn't fully engaged. And there were particularly sort of sections around where Teddy is listening to the conspiracy theories on the radio, which did go on quite along, and I did find myself sort of glazing over a little bit. So I was interested in sort of the overall themes, but I wasn't necessarily interested in the delivery all of the time. I mentioned at the beginning, in a really disjointed way, that it's a bleak book, and it is. The artwork is really bleak, the colours are pretty bleak, and the text is pretty unrelentingly bleak. There is no silver lining, there is nothing uplifting. There's nothing bad about that, I'm just saying it for, you know, sort of information. That is what this book is like. Oh, total old lady comment actually as well, not really related to the book, and you guys out there are probably all rolling your eyes, but sometimes it's got really, really, really tiny text on a coloured background, and I was like, what the? Honestly, struggled a little bit. So graphic novels, not for people over 30 apparently, with slightly dodgy eyesight. But I guess I kind of have questions similar to I do about Snap, about it being on the list. Similar but kind of different actually, because Snap, I was like, okay, this isn't challenging the status quo of the genre in any, you know, specific way. Whereas this one I think does challenge our perceptions of how we behave. It has depth. It challenges, I guess, what fiction is in a way that is new to the booker. But is it right for the booker? I don't know, because I did a little bit of reading, and the booker is sort of, it defines itself as, you know, looking for the best fiction over the course of the past year, which is fine. Okay, fiction, broad term. This is clearly fiction. It is fiction that is created by using words and pictures together. I was thinking about it. You take those pictures away and the words are not going to have the same impact. They are intrinsically tied in a graphic novel. But that doesn't make it any less fiction. But you can have fiction and you can have storytelling with no words whatsoever, can't you? I think that there is, you know, an argument that certain types of art are telling a story, they're fiction, but they don't use words. So this is undoubtedly art. I'm not questioning sort of the quality of it, but I feel that perhaps putting it on this list is a bit gimmicky, because you take those words away, the pictures, or you take the pictures away and the words don't stand alone. And the Booker Prize, although it calls itself a fiction, you know, it is written fiction that they are awarding a prize for. And when push comes to shove, even taking out aside the fact that this book is probably not for me, I'm not sure that it is one that I think should be on this list. And do you know what? Usually I kind of think, I like to think of myself as open-minded and maybe a bit progressive, and apparently I'm not, because I can't handle crime or a graphic novel on the book and long list. But I did try, honestly. And actually, all three of these books are really, really great and staggeringly different, and they're going to satisfy different people. And I love that they're there in order to create that conversation and get different people reading these books and interested in books and talking about the booker and books in general. But how on earth can you possibly begin to compare them? And I think that you can argue that it's impossible to compare any type of books on the book or long list, sort of traditional literary type books, but these are just, in my mind, too far apart for the comparison to be just in terms of saying one is better than the other. So there you go. That's my review of my first 3 books that I've read on the Booker, and a bit of an offshoot into just the Booker in general. Where's Scott when you need him to argue back these points? Where's Scott? I'm sure that he will be back when we're wrapping all this stuff up to probably tell me I'm wrong, knowing him. But there you go. What do you know? So if you've read any of these books, I would really love to know your thoughts. I genuinely would love to know your thoughts. So please do talk to me in the comments below. We also have a book chat going on over at bookaxe.com, which I will link in the comments, where you can come and ask me anything else about these books, or anything else I've said, my opinions, whether you think I'm completely and utterly barking wrong. Do share me. I'm always open for feedback. In the meantime, I don't know when I'll be back. Maybe Scott will be back with his reviews next. I don't know. We'll see. We'll work it out. But we'll be back soon. So happy reading. Please do check out bookaxe.com and the apps, completely free, and I'll see you soon. Bye.